guess it's disappearing.
Well, hey, you know
Not
what?
sure.
I think that's a positive.
Not sure.
But well, last time we were here, we were talking,
recording all of that?
I mean, it was in there. I don't know if I'll use it. There's a rule. There's a rule in video, and the rule is always be recording. Always be recording. You never know what gold and you know what, that could have been a PSA for gentlemen saying,
yeah, it is.
You know,
it's okay. We can talk about it.
We can normalize it.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
You know, I like to go and have a very nice experience when in the barber shop. They do like the whole, get the nice beard cream on, they moisturize the face.
See,
you know what? I like it.
We should be pampered too.
I agree. I agree.
We should do this in his shop.
Oh, John, I hope you're watching, man. We'll have to put a lot of duct tape on the wall. You know, could be our first sponsor.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Because
I'll give.
I don't think Luther's going to sponsor.
You know what? They should.
They should. My daughter's going there, so I'm sponsoring them. Actually.
Yeah. But to backtrack, we just got done last week talking about. What was it? We had Esau.
Well, we had two. We did a little bit of a recap on reconciliation because Pastor Sarah had done reconciliation part 1 with Jacob and Esau, and then the next week we did jealousy, and then this week we did reconciliation part 2 with Joseph and Judah. But reconciliation's so hard. It's really hard. I think it's one of the hardest things human beings can do. I mean, or called to do. I think it's really hard. And that's why we had part 2. And that's why I went back and did a little refresher on that as well.
I think even defining it, because I think people hear the word reconciliation and they'll think many different things.
Well, you know, and it is a lot of different things. You can find reconciliation between two people, whereas there were some disagreement or a fight or something, and they have come together, reconciled their relationship, as in they have decided to move forward together, leaving whatever happened in the past. That's one way of reconciling or resolving the issue. Another way of reconciling is not ever resolving the issue, but deciding that the relationship is more important than the issue. And so they're reconciled in that way. And that happens a lot, especially within like really good friends or marriages where you just get to a point to where it's never going to be, the issue's never going to be fixed or whatever. And it's never going to be resolved, but you decide that the relationship is more important than the issue and you move on. And then that takes two people.
Yep.
And then there's another big part of reconciliation that I think not everybody knows about. You can be reconciled within yourself. Mm. So, as I talked about yesterday, especially when people are betrayed, deeply betrayed, say marriages or really good friends, betrayed in a way that the relationship will never be reconciled, but the person that was hurt can become reconciled within themselves so that they no longer they stop being the victim over and over and over again. And a lot of that is just straight up radical forgiveness for yourself, not for the other. You know, I talked about it in the sermon. You know, young woman found out that her spouse had been unfaithful to her even before they got married, all the way through for like a couple years. And she had come to the conclusion that, yeah, the marriage is not going to be reconciled. That relationship is not going to continue in that way. They share a child. So there's some kind of relationship that's going to have to be developed for the sake of the little guy. But she has found her own radical forgiveness for herself, that she had to forgive and let go in order for her to move on. And that's really hard to do because you'll never get an apology. She'll never get an apology that she can believe, probably. And she'll never be able to have those Jacob Esau moments where there's a kiss on the neck kind of thing, or the Jacob or the Joseph and Judah issue where Judah says, "Take me," and Joseph breaks down because of that sacrifice. She'll never have that. But in order for her to be able to move on with healthiness, she's able to reconcile herself without having the other one knowing. It's a little bit like, well, I'd say it's a lot like what we saw in Esau. Somewhere in his life, and Scripture doesn't tell us this, in the intervening years between when Jacob ran away from home and Esau picked up his sword and was going to try to kill him, couldn't find him, somewhere in Esau's life, he decided to let it go. He had every right to hold a grudge forever, never. He had every right to continue to search for Jacob, to continue to try to find him, to continue to think, harmful and hurtful things about him, because Jacob stole his stuff. But somewhere Esau decided to be done. Somehow he came to the conclusion that, I was talking about it on the weekend, the sword that he was holding was too heavy. He just had to lay it down. And that's what it means. He never probably ever imagined he would ever see Jacob again. Never imagined he'd see Jacob again. But somehow he didn't let that stop him from being healthy for himself. And we don't have that part of the story.
Right.
It would be great for Esau to have a little note, in year blah, blah, BC.
Right when Jacob was getting with the other part of the family.
Part of the family, yeah.
Esau had forgiven him. Meanwhile.
Yeah, and we just don't have that in the story. But
no.
We do have that moment where you know what it takes for another human being who's been wronged to show up to another human being who wronged him and give him an embrace.
Which is fascinating, because I often think that's sometimes the part of the journey, and I think why you said there's this uncommon third option. That's the part of the story that you don't always hear. You always hear about the great meeting when they get together and you find out the surprise, like I had laid down that sword. I was watching Ted Lasso yesterday.
Yeah.
And by the way, we should do a whole sermon series called The Lasso Way, and I'd be totally down with
That's true, yeah.
Because there's so many great moments. But I was watching Ted Lasso yesterday, and if you don't know Ted Lasso, there is a very popular soccer player that he coaches, and his name is Jamie Tart, and he has a falling out with his father earlier on in the season. And it's kind of the big part of the whole season, and he's back in the place where his father usually is, and he doesn't see his father in the stands.
Yeah.
And he's looking for his dad, and he's still mad.
Yeah.
And, Ted kind of kneels next to him, says, "What's going on, Jamie? What's going on?" And he's working through this injury, and he's like, "I'm worried I don't see my dad up there." And he's like, "What would you say to him if you saw him?" You'd say, "Oh, screw him." And, but also, "Thank you." And he's like, and there's this weird moment of thank you.
Yeah.
And Ted goes, "Well, why would you go on?" And eventually he's like, "I could never forgive him."
Well.
And Ted Lasso goes, "Well, forgiving him's that's not something for him. That's for you.
That's for you." Yep.
And that moment, after Sunday's sermon, just poof, hit me kind of hard. But it's so important, because it really is like that forgiveness part.
Yeah.
I think we've all done it where we've maybe this won't be reconciled, but if minimally I forgive this person just so I can move on with my life.
You're never gonna really forget whatever has happened, but to forgive is never for the other person. It's always for yourself. Now, it can be really helpful for the other person to hear that, but you don't always get that, and people will hold on because they want to swing back. That's normal. I mean, we have all of these pictures of people like Gandhi, who doesn't swing back. I bet you there's some moments in Gandhi's life where he's like, I'm swinging back. Now, he swung back in a different way. He went on a hunger strike, right? I mean, but I think that's just a part of who we are as human beings. I think when we're little kiddos, watch little kids play. Someone takes their stuff, then that kid's going to go take their stuff. And I think it's just a part of who we are. It's survival. But I think the bigger part of survival means how do we survive? Because if you're not able to let go of things, you're not really living.
The weight of the sword that hits me when you talk about the weight of how heavy that sword is, because in the beginning when you have all of that, initial adrenaline, I think of even like being an athlete or a musician before a show. At the beginning, you've got all this energy to carry that weight, that initial anger, that initial feud, but eventually that's going to wear off, and then you're still holding the sword. And that adrenaline and that fuel that was like, it gets so heavy to a point that it's detrimental to your health.
Well, and usually is those moments where there's deep betrayal. Like a loved one, good friends. The betrayal is so hard. I always think about this story, though, and I'm not saying we have to be Jesus because it's hard for us to be Jesus, but Judas betrays Jesus. Judas is one of the inner people, right? He's one of the inner guys. He's there with Jesus. He's eating with Jesus. He spends years with Jesus. He's there for the whole deal, and he's given up a lot to be with Jesus, and Jesus recognizes all of that. And at the very end of Judas's and Jesus' relationship, they're in the upper room, and they come to have this Sabbath, this Passover meal together. And at the very end, Jesus is washing Judas's feet. The betrayer, the destroyer, the Greek even calls him that, the son of destruction, that he washes his own betrayer's feet. He serves. So Jesus meets betrayal with hospitality and service, which is, when they had those bracelets years ago, what would Jesus do?
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know if I'd be washing somebody's feet or giving them bread, at the end of their relationship. But it's hard. But I think God calls us for our own good. To be able to figure out ways to let that go. And for some, it might be serving the person that hurt them. It might really be. But it's hard, it's difficult, and it's why it just eats us up.
Well, and inherently we have such ability to make wrong choices as human beings. Same episode of Ted Lasso, and it's the end of the episode, and there was a phrase that knocked me again on my rear end, because I've seen the show before, but there's stuff that keeps popping up, and this one was talking about how I hope all of us are not fully judged in our weakest moments, but judged when we get the second chance to reconcile with ourselves and get that second chance. And it's just like, because like there are, and anybody watching this or anybody who walks through our doors, every one of us has done something, hurt someone, made a mistake, whether big or small. Every one of us has done something, and that's my forever hope is like if I can recognize that moment and then be able to come back with that amount of grace to show someone else and hopefully be able to apologize for the wrongs that I did do. But completely understand if it was too much in the moment.
And we all have those weak moments. And the hope is that the final judgment would be not that weakest moment. We've all said stuff like, oh, why did I say that? Or done something like, oh gosh, and it hurts people, right? But the Lasso has a lot of really good redemptive, reconciling pieces going on. That whole show, the owner, and she's never going to get reconciled with her ex-husband, but she becomes whole, especially without him, and the whole thing is a reconciling moment for her. I mean, you have this whole storyline that goes through all those seasons, and the players find that, individual players. I think that's why it was such a hopeful show, and why it brought so much joy, especially around COVID time, when everybody is looking for some positive thing. And Ted Lasso, that show, just has that theme rolling all the way through. Even him, his wife, then him, his son, all those pieces are floating there. But
And you see the moments of like Jacob and Esau or Joseph and Judah within storylines within the show itself. And this isn't a podcast about Ted Lasso, by the way, but
I'm sure there are.
Oh, there is.
Is there?
There's lots of them out there, but I just find some of this redemptive stuff. For me, a lot of these stories that hit, especially with where I am at my personal life. I went through my own kind of pretty big hardship last year. You were there for a lot of that, and actually that's when that show came in. But now I'm hearing these stories hitting me at a time that I'm ready to kind of be more in the forgiven spot, and also recognize maybe some of the things that I did along the way that created that too. And a lot of it is like, I don't want to hold the sword anymore, man. Like I just want to put it down. So hearing these stories have been so helpful in a way that it's funny once things hit you. And it just so happens that these particular stories are hitting me right at the right time for me to hear it. And I don't always hear your sermons, but lately I've been hearing your sermons.
Well, it's everybody's on their own time frame, and it comes when it comes. It's like you can't force it. And some people, it will take years. The hope is that they'll get there. The hope is even after 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, hopefully, at least for themselves, they can get there. People can feel really, really burnt so bad that it's really hard to come back from that. And the hope is that at some point they would, because there is joy in that. And I think as we move out of Genesis and we move into Exodus, I think we see these stories happen over and over and over again in Genesis. These, kind of these stories that we talked about, the lullaby effect early on. We don't even hear them anymore because we've heard them so many times. Or we don't read them. Or, we don't even take the time to read them. I knew that Joseph story really well, but I was so focused on the Technicolor Dreamcoat, right? The musical, and so focused on the dreams that Joseph had. And the bowing down and the symbolism and all of this, and Joseph's rise to power in Egypt, and his throwing into the pit, and I mean, I know all these stories. I mean, I know the story of Joseph. What I never picked up on for years, until a couple years ago, I read it all over again. And this story of Judah, you can miss. It almost seems like throwaway. But Judah is the one that sells Joseph into slavery. He's the one that convinces the brothers to do that. And at the end, he's the one that says, "Take me. I will be your slave, not Benjamin." And there's so much more to Judah's story than what we were able to get into. Maybe some other time. Next, in 2028, we'll start over again, and we'll go through Genesis and hit stories that we didn't hit. But
yes, but also I have a question, because I'm finding, and this is a completely I don't know all the parts of the Bible, obviously, as well. So, like, Judah, great betrayal. Judas, great betrayal.
Well.
Is there a tie to the name throughout Scripture at all with that? Do we ever have a Jude in the Bible that is...
Jude. I don't think they're connected. I mean, they're very common names. You still get Judas today. You don't get any Judases. I mean, when's the last time anybody's named their kid Judas? Hey, Mom and Dad, we just had a baby. What'd you name it? Judas. No, not happening.
No.
Can you imagine that
cat,
kid?
Maybe.
Yeah. Oh, well, you like cats, right?
I do like cats.
Yeah. But you change schools and you go into like your second grade and they go, "Hey, we have a new student in class today. What's your name?" "Well, my name is Judas." It just doesn't work. But those aren't connected. Now,
in this part of the world,
sure.
And there might be our side, but what about other parts of the world?
There might be kiddos that are named that as well. I know Judah is a popular name, but I don't know. But I missed that. I missed that whole thing for years and years. The lullaby effect.
Yep.
I thought I knew everything about it. And that's another thing that's a problem when you come to something you're not curious anymore. And there doesn't seem to be anything more to be curious about with Joseph because it's been so popularized and everybody knows the story kind of thing.
How much of the lullaby effect is kind of like affected by the kaleidoscope effect? Same image, but you're just at a different part of your life, so you turn the kaleidoscope and it looks different.
I think I think that's true, and what the ancient rabbis and scholars would say is it's called turning the gem, the stone, the diamond, the ruby, whatever it is. It's still the same stone, but when you turn it this way, you see a different angle on it. We in the Western world do not like doing that because we have been taught that there's only one way to look at the stone. To turn it, to ask questions about it, to be curious about it is a no-no because we are being told constantly this is the right answer. We're so focused on answers. We're not focused on the journey. Where there are parts of our journey where this answer works, but there's other parts of our journey when you turn the stone. It's the same stone. It's not a different stone. We didn't throw away the stone and get a new one. It's the same one. And we just struggle with that because when we're kids, we're told that this is what this means. And if you don't believe it, you're going to hell.
Right. Man. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and if we don't do that, then we never ask the question, and we don't know the story. So this has been what we've done in Genesis is take a very well-known, a lot of very well-known stories for Christians, people that have been in church, let's say, and we've turned the stone and looked at them very differently. And for some, that's been really hard. For others, it's been super freeing and exciting. And we started this whole thing going, we want to take care of the people that are going to struggle. They're going to struggle with the fact that if you take the Bible, like the creation story, as a science project, you're going to start with 2 people. Then you're going to start with, then there's going to be 4 people on earth. Then there's only 3 people on earth because one of them kills another one. And then when that third person gets kicked out, gets married to somebody, but no one has heard that. I mean, there are people that have come up to me, they're like, I never thought about that, you know, because they turned the Bible into a science project, especially that story, to try to protect it. And in protecting it, you make a house of cards, because you pull one out, the whole thing falls down. But if you look at it as a beautiful, wonderful, amazing, precious, costly, expensive gem or a stone, and you can turn it and look at it, the whole thing becomes a lot more open. And hopefully that's what we've done in Genesis.
Well, and I think that's a big part of faith too, you know.
Yep.
It's so easy. We kind of talk about, you know, a lot of what church was for me as a kid is different than what it was for me as an adult. And to be honest, when I was a kid, I just wanted to get to recess or outside. Sure. I just wanted to go check the box. Yep. And I think what's great about what we're doing now is, you know, it challenges that part of me. Instead of just going to church, getting what I already know and leaving, it's leaving me with more to talk about in this world. And actually, you talk about turning the gem. 1 year ago from today, we could be talking about this redemption stuff, and I would not have heard a single word of it.
Yeah.
Because I was not ready for that.
Yep.
But now, Gem is at a point where I'm absolutely willing to hear it.
Well, and the beautiful thing about this whole book is it starts with this amazing story of creation. There's chaos. There's absolutely nothing. And it's almost as if God reconciles the nothingness with the somethingness. And the universe is created. It's like this God continues to try to find ways to bring healing and wholeness and creativity, reconciling a nothingness with the somethingness. And at the middle of that is Sabbath, right? That chiastic reality. And then at the very end of the story, so in the beginning you have this God reconciling nothing with something, and water and air and land and all these things are, and at the very end of this book, human beings finally figure out a way to reconcile with each other. And if you notice, in the story of Joseph, God does not appear at all. God doesn't tell Joseph, you have to forgive. God doesn't tell Judah, you have to sacrifice. God doesn't tell Esau, he's got to lay down his sword. God does tell Jacob, you got to go back. But in all that story, God is not directing the reconciling. Somehow in us, inside of us, we can trust the story because it's been put in us. We've been created it with us, with it in us. And Judah was able to say, take me. And God didn't say, well, Judah, you got to make up for your mistake, man. You got to make up for your mistake. Judah just does it because of the pain that his father is in. So you have these amazing bookends of Genesis that are very similar stories. there's chaos in Joseph's family, right? Chaos and pain, and nothing's working. And after the reconciliation, the book of Genesis ends as if everything in the world is perfect. That the Joseph story bookends the creation story, and it's almost like they return to the garden. It's almost like they go back to where everything is gonna be just fine. That's beautiful to me, that it ends, it begins and it ends almost in exactly the same way, in terms of healness and holing and wholeness. And then again, we're gonna lose about 400 years, and then go into Exodus.
Interesting. Now, is there a book on that 400 years, or is it just gone?
Nothing.
Makes you wonder about those 400 years a little bit.
Oh yeah. Well, and then those 400 years, and we can get into. Are we doing part 2?
I figured.
Are we doing part 2 today too?
Well, are we doing a double today?
Yeah.
No, we aren't doing a double
today.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
We were, but then we found out we have a meeting about the podcast later.
Okay, all right. Oh, okay.
Russ corrected me this morning. I'm like, we're doing a double today.
Okay.
And Russ was like, yeah, about that.
All right.
But we'll get there.
We'll get into a little bit of Exodus as we go through that period. So can I recap Genesis real quick?
Absolutely.
Where we've been. And I just brought my notes. So we started this on September 7th and 8th, that weekend of 2024.
Yep.
And we started at the heart. At the heart of creation is Sabbath, verse 4. The chiasm, 7 days, verse 4. What's the middle? We've also been called to bear the image of God well. God has called us, and those are the stories we have to remind ourselves. Those are the stories we have to trust. And then we went into God knows when to stop creating, where it's a great message for us because sometimes we don't know when to stop creating. And God found a place and said, no, this is good. It doesn't need to be perfect. This is good, and was able to walk away. And then we get into this story with Adam and Eve, and you get this walking, talking being that's rational, that can ask questions, that seems to know more about the garden than Adam and Eve do. And we wonder, what is the real temptation? And I think the real temptation in that story, one of the major ones, is the temptation to either, the snake is saying, you don't need to listen to God. Listen to me. I'm like you. Be a beast like me. And the question is, well, will Adam and Eve become beasts just like all the other things that were created? And they end up eating from the tree where they all of a sudden now they know right from wrong. And that pushes them out of the garden. And then they have 2 kiddos, Cain and Abel. Cain becomes a beast. Cain gives in to the beast. Rabbi David Fohrman wrote that book, The Beast is Crouching at the Door. And it is. It's always there. It's like at our weakest moments, right? We just talked about it. The beast can take over. And so the beast does. He kills his brother, and now he's also cast out into the wilderness, and that's where he meets a lady to marry. That hey, there are probably other people running around the world then at that time too. And then we get to this point where there's lots of people running around the world, and they're just creation is not being what God wants it to be. And God decides that God's going to start over. And God starts over with a particular family named Noah. And in the middle of that whole story is God's promise to never destroy the world again. And then puts a bow in the cloud with the business end pointing up as a symbol to humanity, that God's not pointing an arrow down at earth if the bow fires, it's going to fire an arrow away from the earth, because God has created this suzerain vassal relationship. Do you remember that whole thing? Yep. And the suzerain is the more powerful, the vassal is the weaker, and the vassal is the one that should be coming to the suzerain asking for help, and then getting having to remind the suzerain of their promise. God says, I'm going to do both. I'm the suzerain, yeah, I'm more powerful, but I'm making the promise to you, and I will remember that promise. And that's the same thing that that God does with Abraham as he walks the blood path. This covenant that God makes with Abraham. Abraham knows he can't. He knows he can't. He's going to fail, and his body's going to lay in a bloody mess. That's just kind of that was their covenants back then. And God says, no, I got it, and walks the blood path for him. Again, doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And then God finds this family, Abram and Sarah, and they're given a new name, both Abraham and Sarah. And then we skip through Advent, and then we hit this family as they struggle with the thought that they're not going to have any children. And Abraham has a child with Hagar, which is the servant of Sarah. It's never a good idea. If my wife ever says, hey, do you want to have a child with my servant? I'm going to say no. Yep. Because it never ends well. Nope. It's just no, I think that was pretty normal back then. But there's going to be jealousy and all kinds of stuff that comes.
Different times, human emotions haven't changed much.
But it's like, Abraham's like, no, Sarah, I love you. I don't think this is going to work out. But anyway. And then they have Ishmael. But Hagar gets kicked out of the camp. And God goes back to Hagar and says, no, wait a second. You got to come back. There's a promise for you. We didn't go through this as we went through, but Hagar's story and Abraham's story are a chiasm. They are mirrors of each other. The Abraham Hagar story and the Abraham Isaac story. Hagar goes out in the wilderness. Her suffering produces, like, she can't see because she's suffering so much. But there's a well of water right there. God comes to her and hears her, and all of a sudden now she can see, and the water's there. The same thing is true for Abraham. He's suffering. He's been told he's got to go kill his son Isaac. He's suffering. He takes him 3 days to get there, where only should take him a day or half a day even. And he doesn't see what's already there. And what's already there is a ram, a goat, a sheep in the bush that he can use instead of his son. So they mirror each other. And if you could probably find it on the internet somewhere where someone will show that to you, how that mirrors together. And then we have this really interesting take on Abraham and Sarah. They're strangers. They're immigrants. They're illegal aliens living where they're not supposed to live, and they are welcomed in by these people. They're aliens in that land, and they're able. They ask for help, and they're able to get it through Abraham needs some land, and so they sell him some land. Then we go into this amazing story of Sarah and Milcah. It's controversial, but everything that I've read leads me to believe that Sarah and Milcah are sisters. And Abraham marries, we talked about that horizontal line and the vertical line, that anywhere along that line you could call anybody a sister. It could be a cousin, second cousin, third cousin. And then anyone along the patriarchal line is the father. And so you're all fathers. Your father is all whatever. And then you could have that. So you have this legacy that these two women leave. One has Isaac and the other has Rebekah. And they get married and Jacob is born. And you just don't hear in Genesis a lot about the women. But none of this works without the women.
No.
Hagar is a promise carrier. Sarah is a promise carrier. Milcah is a promise carrier. It's so patriarchal in how it's written. It's almost like the women are like, not in the room. But they're deeply, deeply, deeply involved and connected in.
You know how I remember suzerain and vassal and who has more power? I think Susan, because the woman has more power.
Oh, okay. There you go. All right.
That's how I remember that.
That works. And then we get to the part that we just talked about, the reunion, reconciliation, then this jealousy thing that happens in reconciliation. So every single one of these stories reflect who we are as human beings. And when we see these human beings trust the story, amazing things happen. When they don't trust the story, really bad things happen. And the same thing is true for us. That these aren't just old, dusty stories. These are stories that happen all the time in our world.
Well, and as we commented last week, how human these stories are.
Yeah.
Like, if you can't, and maybe something we need to look more at is the human side of it. One of the things that I pulled from even this recap is I think of the stories that we told, and I know there's more, but the trio of brothers stories,
Yeah.
Cain and Abel. Well, It starts out very grim. One of those brothers kills one of the brother.
Yeah.
Then you move on to Esau and Jacob.
Yeah.
And you have a situation where one betrays the other. Now, there was definitely anger, and maybe that could have happened, but that story resolves with God telling Jacob, you need to go. Got to go back.
Yep.
And there is a reconciliation one. And then you move to the final of those trio of brothers stories where God doesn't get involved, and that we've progressed to a point now where Judah goes and needs to apologize to Joseph.
Yeah.
And I find that fascinating, those trio of... I have 4 brothers, so that's probably why I lock onto that.
Yeah.
But that's how that progressed in this particular book.
Yeah. It moves through all of that, and it's so real. Brothers fight.
Mm-hmm.
This whole story in Genesis is a family that's fighting with each other. This family, Ishmael gets kicked out. He's a brother. And we're still fighting. People are still fighting that today. Ishmael, our Muslim brothers and sisters, track their line to Abraham back through Ishmael. We track our line to Abraham through Isaac. Man, wouldn't it have been amazing if Isaac and Ishmael couldn't have got together? Now, they did at Abraham's funeral. So something happened there for them to be able to be together. Excuse me. But if that family would have been able to just stay together, what would it be like today? But I think that's also true of just the human family, because we're all a part of the same human family, and we're split up all over the place, doing all kinds of stuff. And so anyway, I think that's my wrap up for Genesis, and I think we're probably going to refer back to it a ton, because it is the foundation for the whole story moving forward. And we're going to have 400 years in Egypt. What happens is Joseph sets up his family with in the best parts of Egypt, very rich farmland. And slowly but surely, the Egyptians begin to turn on these they weren't Israelites yet, this Semitic group of people, and they become slaves. And we're not really sure how many. It's like, I think it's roughly around 400 years between the break of, at least in Scripture it says that, the break of when Joseph dies to when Moses comes on the scene. And these people have started to cry out to God. For some reason, God has not been involved in the story for 400 years. I mean, at face value, let's just start there, and then we'll see where God's been involved. Maybe God was in I don't know, Alaska, doing something over there for 400 years, making Canada the great country that it is to this day. But the people cry out, and God hears the cry. Just like God heard the cry of Hagar, God heard the cry of Abraham, God hears the cry. And just a little primer for this Sunday, camera 1, or?
Camera 2.
Oh, that's camera 2.
That's camera 2, but look right down.
I'll look right there. A little hint for this Sunday is that God hears the cry, and in Luke, God hears the cry. In Exodus, God hears the cry and sends Moses. In Luke, the story of the Samaritan, God hears the cry and sends a good Samaritan. A group of people being beaten and oppressed and being stole from, feeling like they've been left on the side of the road to rot. In Luke, the same thing is happening. Someone's beaten, bloodied, robbed, left on the side of the road to die, and God hears both of those and sends the exact right person to deal with it. Moses is going to be the one in Exodus, and the Samaritan guy, who's only good later. That's the title we give him. He was not labeled the Good Samaritan, but that's the title we give him, because that maybe he could have been the Bad Samaritan. I don't know, but that has nothing to do with anything. But
so that was the tiny nugget for this weekend.
That was a tiny nugget for this weekend. I basically preached that whole sermon right there. So
yeah. Felt like a pretty good synopsis of what we're doing this weekend.
So don't come.
No, you should absolutely
come.
Well, I've actually really enjoyed this journey through Genesis.
Yeah.
And it's really, I personally grab more onto the stuff that we don't always talk about. Yeah. And it's been a fascinating journey. And actually, I would say this to anybody who's been watching the podcast. If you have questions about Genesis or about some of the things we're talking about, I'm going to put Nina's email on the screen here. It'll be somewhere right here-ish. And feel free to email those questions, because we'd love to hear them, and we'd love to answer them. And what about we? I mean, he will answer them, and I will make snide comments along the way.
Yeah, and I may answer them with more questions, because there's always ways to turn that stone, that beautiful, precious stone that we call our scriptures. It doesn't make it less valuable to turn that stone. It just makes that stone look more beautiful. And we started out this whole thing with the story of me looking through a window and only seeing part of the room. And that's how we are a lot. We look through a window only seeing part. But if we're able to go to a different window, then we're able to see more of the room. And other people's questions and other people's perspectives help us walk around that room and look in the windows. So.
Oh, yeah, I love that. And if you have a story of reconciliation, I mean, I always find, even in the stories in the Bible or stories from my friends or story from people even in church, how powerful a story can be from our community. So if you have any stories you'd be willing to share with us, we would love those.
That'd be great.
As well.
Everybody needs to be inspired.
Yeah.
We need to be inspired.
Yeah. Well,
cool,
this
man.
has been great. If you're following the podcast, please like us on YouTube, hit the bell, smash the subscribe button. Make sure to take that camera this time. That camera. There you go. Perfect. Nailed it. Check out some of the books that PD has been requesting. There's been 4 or 5. 5 books, all great reads. This one's by Rabbi David Fohrman.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, thank you, PD.
Hey, this is great.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week.
Okay, we'll see you next week.